Hey guys, this is Austin. We are almost halfway through 2018, which means that flagship phones are coming. And to start out this new wave, we have the brand new OnePlus 6. So in a world of $1,000 flagships, the idea that you can pick up a phone like the OnePlus 6 for starting at $530 means that you're really getting a lot of those same specs, a lot of those same features, but at a much lower price. But as always, the question is it worth it? So what we have here is the mid-spec model. So not only is this going to have 8 GB of RAM, but it's also going to have 128 gigs of storage. Now, this is in the midnight black color, and if we remove the little sticker here, you can see that is, well, not only incredibly shiny, but the last time this will ever be completely perfect until I get my grimy fingerprints on it. So if you put the OnePlus 6 side by side with the 5T, one of the main things you'll notice is that instead of the metal back that they've had for quite a few years, instead we do have that all Gorilla Glass 5 look. Now it is going to be slightly tapered on the back, and honestly it kind of feels nice, sort of similar to what you would find on something like the Galaxy S8 or Galaxy S9. Before we get too far into it though, I want to take a look inside the box, and what we're going to find is not only our USB-C to USB-A cable, but also the rather large dash charger. Something that OnePlus has been known for quite a few years now is the idea that they have some of the fastest charging phones out there. Fire up the OnePlus 6 and the first thing you'll see is the notch. Yes, my friends, like basically all smartphones in 2018, the OnePlus has gotten onto the notch train. But I will say they've actually done it a little bit differently here. So the first thing you'll notice is that the notch is actually one of the smallest that you'll see. Most of that is because there's really not a whole lot here besides the front-facing camera, the light sensor, as well as your earpiece. But something else to pay attention to is how small the rest of the bezels are. So there's basically nothing on these sides of the display, and even the chin is going to be really, really minimal. Where this is really noticeable is when you put it side by side with the OnePlus 5T. And even though the overall footprint of the phones are almost identical, what you're getting here is going to be a little bit of a larger display because you don't have that sort of forehead, and the chin is going to be smaller. And because of that, you're going from a 6-inch display to a 6.3 in that same size body. This guy is rocking a 6.3-inch 2280 by 1080 AMOLED display. Now that's going to be a slightly unusual 19:9 aspect ratio, but what it does mean is that while it's not going to be the most high-res screen in the world, you are going to be getting something that again covers pretty much the entire front of the phone. Now generally speaking, I feel like a 1080p resolution is pretty solid on a phone this size. However, because it is AMOLED, if you do look up close, you're going to see some slight jaggies. It's not going to be quite as sharp as something like a Galaxy S9 screen, but as soon as you get it more than a few inches away from your face, I think it's going to be totally solid. And importantly, the screen quality itself is actually super high with this guy. So not only is the OnePlus 6 color calibrated straight from the factory, but you also do have extra modes inside the settings. So you can set it to the default mode, which to my eye is a little bit oversaturated. You also have sRGB, you have DCI-P3, as well as the adaptive mode, but I like going to the custom color and just tweaking it to be a little bit more natural.
Now with the S9, you're really not going to be losing anything, but also
so you will see that the screen, even when you do the custom profile, is going to be slightly oversaturated, but that's almost more of an OLED thing. Now speaking of OLED things, if you do look at it slightly off axis, you're going to see that the viewing angles are good but not amazing. However, that's going to be pretty much any AMOLED panel. But what isn't going to be quite so great is the HDR playback. This does support HDR video, however, it actually does it at a little bit of a choppy rate, at least on YouTube. Don't get me wrong though, this is an incredibly nice display, and in a lot of ways, it's right up there with stuff like the Galaxy S9 as well as the iPhone. The only thing that really holds it back is going to be the slightly lower resolution, but as long as you're sort of at a normal viewing distance, it's really not going to be an issue. The OnePlus 6 does still have dual SIM card slots, which is definitely appreciated, but you do not have any kind of micro SD expandability. If you want any more storage, you're going to have to buy it ahead of time, but thankfully it's actually not going to be that pricey. So the base model at $530 does have 64 gigs of storage, but another $50 will bump you up to 128, and if you want to spend another $100, you're going to be getting 256 gigs of storage. Pretty reasonable in my opinion. Take a look at the bottom of the phone. In addition to the USB-C port, you're also going to find the headphone jack. Yes, my friends, a high-end phone in 2018 that does come standard with a headphone jack. One thing that the OnePlus 6 does not have is a great speaker. So like the previous models, there's only going to be a single mono speaker that fires down. It's going to be reasonably loud, but it would be really nice to join the rest of the high-end flagships by adding a front-firing speaker up top that doubles as your speaker grill thing, whatever they call it, headset, what? I always forget what it's called, the stupid earpiece. Now because we do have a glass back, the phone is fairly slippery, but there's actually going to be a fairly hard chamfer on the side, which does kind of give you a little bit of grip. And something else that OnePlus really nailed are the buttons. This is not something I talk about very often because, well, if For the most part, a button is a button, but not only are they going to be pretty raised up, they're not going to be flush at all, but they're nicely spaced and they actually feel really good. There's this nice tactile click, and especially with the volume rockers and as well as the little OnePlus slider that will turn on and off the mute or the vibrate switch, everything feels really solid. They did a good job here. The fingerprint sensor around back works just as you would expect, so it is going to be right below the camera bump, which is a little bit large on the phone, but just kind of helps you find the fingerprint sensor. And on top of that, this does also have an upgraded version of Face Unlock. Now, it's not going to be as secure as something like the iPhone 10, but it does work pretty well. So I kind of hold it up here and hit the button, pretty much immediately unlocks as if I didn't even have a passcode. Maybe not the most secure thing in the world, but it is definitely fast. This is the first time that OnePlus has gone with an all-glass construction for one of their phones, and it does look pretty nice and allow them to do multiple colors. The midnight black is interesting looking, even though it is going to be super fingerprinty. However, there are going to be some interesting trade-offs. So yes, it feels nice in the hand, especially because it is going to be curved on back, but it's not really going to be all that unique. It's very common for flagship phones and even some budget options to go with a glass construction in 2018. Now, the trade-off when you go with glass, even with something high-end like this Gorilla Glass 5, is that you're going to be losing some durability. Now, of course, you can get sort of micro scratches and stuff, but that can kind of happen on any phone. But the real worry is if you drop it, you could totally shatter not only the front, but also the back of the phone. The worst part is you're really not going to be getting anything besides the aesthetics. So while a metal phone generally will not allow you to wireless charge because the metal will interfere, most of the time a glass phone will. However, for some odd reason, OnePlus decided to opt out of adding any kind of wireless charging capability to the OnePlus 6. Sure, it's got the super fast dash charging, and honestly, I end up using sort of normal wired charging a lot more than wireless anyway, but it would be really nice to have that option, especially considering that it's not even that expensive. It's kind of weird that they didn't include it. Now, there is going to be some waterproofing inside the phone. However, OnePlus did not opt to do any kind of IP67 or IP68 rating. Basically, what that means is that it actually might not be that far off from something like an iPhone or Galaxy as far as being waterproof, but if you actually get it wet and kill it, it's not going to be warranty supported, so you're on your own on that one. There are some other nice features, including a full RGB notification light, as well as an ambient display mode. So like something like the Pixel or the Galaxy S9, you can see at a quick glance your notifications and the time and date. However, unlike those phones, it's not going to be always on. You're going to either have to tap the display or actually raise it up for it to trigger. Inside, you're going to find full flagship level specs. So it's going to be rocking a Snapdragon 845 processor with 8 cores, as well as either 6 or 8 GB of RAM depending on which model you pick up. Now in the Android space, that's about as good as it gets. It's right on par with something like the Galaxy S9, and if you look at it side by side with other phones like the iPhone as well as the OnePlus 5T, it does do a pretty solid job. The performance, generally speaking, is very good, exactly like you would expect with this level of specs. So the UI is going to be nice and smooth. One of the nice things is that with that kind of level of performance, you are going to be future-proof to some degree. Especially with these kind of graphics, a lot of games in the future should run pretty well on the OnePlus 6. The OnePlus 6 is running Android 8.1 Oreo with Oxygen OS on top. Now it's going to be a fairly light skin, so generally speaking OnePlus doesn't add a lot of bloat and they add actually legitimately useful features, and one of which has to do with the notch. Now if for some reason you hate the look of a notch, you can actually turn it off in the settings. So all you need to do is go into the notch display option and hit hide the notch area, and what that will mean is that any kind of app cannot actually take advantage of that top area. Although thankfully you are still going to be able to use stuff like your status bar and everything that's going to be tucked up in the corner. There's also going to be a built-in reading mode. So you can turn this on for the entire OS or just for specific apps, but once you turn it on, it turns everything full grayscale and it warms up the display just a little bit. It kind of looks like you're reading off of a newspaper. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a niche option, but especially if you're sitting in bed late at night and you don't want to sort of sear your eyes with super bright colors, it actually is pretty calming, although you probably want to use this for text and not video. There's not a lot to complain about with the software on this guy. Sure, you're not going to be getting Android updates quite as fast as on a Pixel, but OnePlus does have a good track record for keeping things up to date in a reasonable sort of time frame, and on top of that, you're also going to be getting a pretty bloat-free experience. As far as the cameras go, while on paper it looks very similar, the OnePlus 6 has seen some major upgrades. So around back, you're still going to be getting a 16 megapixel main sensor as well as a 20 megapixel telephoto option, but that main sensor has been upgraded with not only optical image stabilization, but it also is now going to be a little bit larger than it was before. So if we line up a shot here of Ken, we're going to see that not only does the HDR immediately pop up, but something that's really impressive is that it takes pictures fast. feel like I've been using a lot of budget Android phones that take a while. This one's pretty much instant. This shot's actually pretty nice too. Does a really good job of keeping in all those highlights with HDR. There's really not anything that we're missing. So with the telephoto camera, we're going to be losing a little bit of sharpness, but I'm actually not that disappointed. A lot of times with smartphones that do have dual cameras, while the main camera might look great, a lot of times when you switch over to the 2x zoom, it doesn't look so great, but this is not bad at all. So something else that the OnePlus 6 has now is going to be a portrait mode. So if we switch over to it, it's going to turn on the depth effect, although interestingly, it's actually using it on the wide angle camera. Okay, let's give this a try. Oh, perfect, there we go. A wonderful shot of lots of hearts behind Ken. That's a special one right there. If we look at the standard portrait mode though, what we're getting here is something that looks okay, but you know, it's not really that great. First of all, I like it when a portrait mode will use the telephoto camera. It's a little bit more of a compressed focal length, I guess would be the correct phrase. But this, man, the edges are all just blurry. Nah, this is not great. Get some good light and you can actually get a ton of detail out of these photos. If you look up close to the little fibers on the leaf, they're super clear and super crispy. Something else I'm really appreciating with shooting with this camera is that there's very little latency when it comes to taking a shot, or especially when it comes to viewing your images. Everything is pretty much instant. So if you want to take a couple shots, quickly make sure you got the thing and then move on right back into the camera, there's really no lag. We're also going to be getting some pretty decent slow motion options. So the OnePlus 6 will shoot up to 4K at 60 frames per second, and when you slow that down, it looks pretty nice. But if you really want some proper slow motion, you're going to be getting either 720p at 480, or my personal favorite is 1080p at 240 frames per second. You're still getting decent quality, but it's going to slow down and still give you that cool look. I mean, this is cool, right? Switching up cameras for a second, this is what 4K video looks like on the OnePlus 6. Now, importantly, we do have that optical image stabilization, which, especially when you're shooting 4K, is super helpful, but it's pretty much useful for any kind of smartphone video. So you guys can see as we move around a little bit, it should be reasonably smooth. So, is the OnePlus 6 worth it? At a little bit over $500, you're getting the entire flagship experience. Now yes, there are going to be a couple things missing, such as the lack of wireless charging, but you consider that this is going to cost a lot less than a lot of other flagships that perform very, very similarly. It's kind of hard to argue that this is not the definition of being worth it.